Hello, a very warm welcome for those that went with us into that break. And if you are just joining us from wherever you are watching NTV, this is a special edition of Morning at NTV, and we are coming to you live from the Victoria Hall here at the Kampala Serena Hotel, where a post-budget breakfast is being held, organized by NTV, and of course brought to us by ABSA Bank and Deloitte. Over the next few hours, experts will be weighing in on exactly what this particular budget 2024-2025 means for the private sector and what are the takeaways that many of you should be looking out for. Out straight, if you are watching from wherever you are, you can see in the background there's going to be a panel discussion later, and on that particular panel, experts will be helping us understand. Before I delve into the discussion, before that, we shall have the permanent secretary and the secretary to the Treasury in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, Mr. Ramadan Gobi. We shall also have panelists who will be unpacking the budget as presented by the Finance Minister yesterday. Michael Seguaya, the Executive Director and Chief Finance Officer at ABSA Bank Uganda, will be joining that panel and will be seated right there as you see behind me. We shall also have Patronella Nambiru. She is an Associate Director for Tax and Legal at Deloitte Uganda. We shall also be hearing from Sarah Chelangat Mazunyo, the Commissioner Domestic Taxes at Uganda Revenue Authority, as well as Alan Senyondwa, who is the Director Policy and Advocacy at the Uganda Manufacturers Association. That conversation is going to be, well, a good one that you should not be able to miss. It will be running live on NTV Uganda as well as ABSA Bank Uganda's digital platform. You don't want to miss it out. For now, though, I have with me three persons who will be also trying to unpack the budget as we wait for that particular discussion and engagement to get underway. On my immediate left is Charles Boji, a business journalist, one who has been at it for a time, 2 decades, so to speak. So we shall be looking forward to exactly what your bird's eye view of the budget in light of what was presented by the minister yesterday is. We also have Mr. Stephen Kaboyo, the managing director at Alpha Capital Partners. He's a man that wears a lot of hats, but allow me to stick to that one for now. Many thanks for joining us, Mr. Kaboyo.
Thank you.
On the extreme is Abubakar Mayanja. He's an economist, but I love to understand him better as the Vice President of Africa FAFIN Advisors. Many thanks for making it this morning. Let me begin with the business journalist, not because he wears the same hat as I do as a journalist, but if listening to the minister yesterday, he came off as cautiously optimistic, talking about economic recovery and how we've been able to come through it in light of the internal and external shocks that the economy has experienced over the last few years. He is believable when he talks about it, but when you look deeper into the figures, because that's where the number crunching comes into play, 6% growth for the financial year that is ending as we begin the next. I don't know whether he was spot on. I don't want us to go into the typical journalistic mindset of doing the fact-checking, but what's your take on that?
Chris, I think from where I sit, that is a mixed bag for me, because I want to look at the fundamentals of the economy, for starters. And even before there, I mean, just looking at generally effective demand this year or the concluding financial year, it has been really a tough run for anyone in business. If you speak to people in trade, if you speak to people in the services sector, you know, many would point to the fact that it hasn't been easy. Then you look at aspects like the currency, you know, the position of the shilling. I know Stephen here will actually shed more light on that.
That's right.
You know, the shilling has really struggled in this financial year. It's really been tough, and with that we've had spillovers into you know, different areas of business and trade, because as you know, trade is a very important component of this economy.
That's right.
In as much as, you know, the service and manufacturing sector is. So if the shilling loses ground against major international currencies, especially the dollar, then it means more prices, and with it, of course, inflation can also come in, and it limits you know, the basket of goods that people can have access to. So that hasn't fared well. If you look at the price of fuel as well, it hasn't been easy in that space. So like you said, it's cautious optimism, but in my view, really those numbers need to be interrogated a little more, the 6% growth. It's quite an optimistic projection, but maybe, the minister could be knowing a lot more than we do. However, from where I sit, it's really a mixed bag.
Okay, interesting there. And of course, we shall be looking forward to the experts, like I said earlier. Mr. Stephen Kaboyo, you deal with the markets and the shilling and how it performs, the fluctuations here and there is something that you must have been following, and it's across the region. Kenya had its own fair share of the effects that came through, but I think there's been a bit of stability that has been registered right now. Comment on that, but also give us your view and what you took from yesterday's general reading of the budget.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by expressing my views on the budget statement yesterday.
Okay.
Then I'll come to the shilling performance. You're right. The minister came out overly optimistic about the current economic situation and outlook going forward. I think that's what you'd expect from a budget statement.
That's right.
It has to balance factors. It cannot come out there and scare everybody. So it has to sort of come with some confidence.
That's right.
But, like I said, and Charles said, that you need to go back and interrogate the facts a little bit more. When you look at the statement, I think the minister was very soft on headwinds, the economic headwinds, both domestic and external. Those are strong factors that actually can interfere with the macroeconomic stability. So going forward, we do not know a number of things. Geopolitical risks increasing. The economic activity locally in the domestic economy is subdued. If you go downtown, you'll see closures of many businesses. How is that reflected in the growth numbers that we are talking about? Cost of living is going up. So for me, the budget speech came out as overly optimistic, but there are certain things that we need to put into perspective to balance the outlook. That drives me to the whole issue of revenue.
Yeah.
If you look at the revenue performance for the last year, for example, we cannot go back into history, but still the trend is the same. Government has fallen short on revenue targets. What does that tell you? It tells you that economic activity is not as vibrant because people are not paying taxes. They don't have anywhere to get the taxes from. I don't see that abating soon. It will continue going forward. So now you come with a huge budget, 72 trillion. I mean, you can discount that and say partly there's some funds that are earmarked for net domestic financing that goes to BOU. You take that off, about 9 trillion, but still the targets for URA are larger than the last year. So if URA failed to meet last year's targets, what makes us believe that they will overperform this year? So there's a question mark there.
That's right.
Then the other issue, I want to call this budget a debt-ridden budget, because where you have almost 50% of your budget going to service debt and pay debt off, you only have 50 left. Then you go into recurrent expenditure, what are you left with? So balancing that budget and finance, before even go into financing sources, is going to be a major challenge.
Okay.
But let me break there and go to the shilling.
That's right.
The shilling, in my view, is the stability that we've seen, is calm before the storm. Because what fundamentals are there to keep the shilling where it is? For me, I think we're just sitting, waiting to see a depreciated currency. One key issue is that we do not have a solid reserve position, FX position, to support the currency stability.
That's right.
Now, the market knows that. Everybody knows that. Now, when you have no sufficient reserves to support the shilling, then you are just sitting, waiting for a chance. So that's one aspect. The other issue is financial conditions have tightened around the world. We see the U.S. Rebounding. The flows that we've been depending on are likely not to come as strong as they used to be because there will be capital flows or reversal of flows. That affects our currency as well. So for me, I see a weak currency as we go into the new financial year, and we should brace ourselves for a depreciated currency going forward.
Abubakar Mayanja, your views on the budget and also the fact that Mr. Kaboyo speaks about the fact that headwinds across the globe could be something that we must brace ourselves for in light of what's coming ahead. Your understanding of these matters is from a vantage point. If you were to advise the minister right now, how would you go about it?
Right, that's a tough one to advise the minister. But there are some numbers I can read out for you just to set the stage.
Okay.
Which just complement what Mr. Boji said and Mr. Kaboyo. We are looking at the categories of taxpayers by size. Those between who pay over 100 billion, reduced from 125 to 6 between 2020 and 2023. And those who pay between 50 billion shillings and 100 billion, reduced from 130 to 3. Those who pay between 10 billion and 50 billion, reduced from 871 to 63. Those who pay between 5 billion, those are income taxes for companies, and 10 billion, reduced from 711 to 58. And then shillings 1 billion to 5 billion, reduced from 2912 to 773. So what does that tell you? It kind of plays into what Mr. Kaboyo has been saying, that the minister faces a tough balancing act. It has never been clear in Uganda whether the weakness is with the tax administration, which is URA, or it is with tax policy, or policy in general and public choice. There are efficiencies which one would have expected to see in the budget in terms of rationalizing expenditure and where it goes. And just to tell you how tough it is for the minister, I think I drew a picture of institutions in just the economic sector. Maybe I can get them from my head. You've got the Ministry of Finance, then you've got the National Planning Authority, then you've got Export Promotions Board, then have the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, Uganda Tourism Board, Uganda Investment Authority. There are many. Then you've got Uganda Free Zones Authority. All these institutions are related to economic management, including MTIC. Then you've got Population Secretariat, Uganda Bureau of Statistics. I've not yet touched regulators. If you go to regulators, you're going to have the Uganda Insurance Authority, Uganda Retirement Benefits Authority. You're going to have Bank of Uganda, Capital Markets Authority. So the challenge with that, and what has been the running weakness in government, is the policies are very good, but every time they come up with a new policy, they create a new institution, which is not necessary.
And a whole set of new challenges.
Because I just don't want to be critical. I just want to put things in perspective of how we get here.
That's right.
Because the pressure on tax is a fiscal pressure emanating out of the need to generate revenue. Now, where do those institutions become challenging? Now, the institutions and what they do is not an issue, it's needed. But it's not absolutely necessary to create a new institution for every policy. So if you look, that's just the financial sector. We are in the number 20 now. What makes it worse, we have behavioral issues that have persisted for a very long time, which we expected that to be tapered back in these circumstances, and why everybody and every company has had to cut back since COVID, then Ebola, then Ukraine. Even debt, there's been debt stress for individuals and companies. So what that means is that we had expected to see some form of consolidation. Now, what makes it worse, going to Mr. Kaboyo's side of the exchange rate, is that each one of those institutions needs to have an executive director who somehow has to have an SUV. Now, the disadvantage of an SUV is that it externalizes our export earnings. This is the disadvantage. It's not that it's not needed, but if you buy 20 of them and you have to maintain them and they're not fuel efficient, we end up using so many liters of fuel every day. Now, as long as the coffee expansion happens, but the number of SUVs and four-wheel drives grows faster than that, then we have that challenge where we have less dollars and there's pressure.
Interesting there.
There's something I wanted to say. Chris, you know, when Mr. Mayanja here was talking about the number of businesses that have literally gone off the radar.
I mean, it's a damning assessment.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a clean shave. So I, you know, the journalist in me keeps and I keep asking, and I'll put it to you, Mr. Mayanja and Stephen, what could be the cause of that? Is it the tax regime? Is it the times where we are? And the reason why I'm saying could it be the tax regime is because we haven't seen this happen before, you know, the taxman came in with, okay, should I say efficiency? Because, you know, the tag word for, you know, the new electronic, you know, tax collection system, IFRIS, is that it's delivering efficiency in trying to get whoever, you know, has to pay tax to actually pay tax. So that, what does that speak to when you see so many businesses going under in different, you know, revenue bands? Because you're talking about the businesses that are within hundreds of millions, and then the multi-billion businesses also going under. What do you read from that, and how do we move forward?
Okay, what causes stress to businesses are two things. And this is why I came with a distinction. I don't know if I have to break it down more. The tax policy is the part where the government decides which taxes to levy and the tax rates,
That's right.
30%. And then URA has to go and implement. In the process of implementation, it can use technology like IFRIS.
Yeah.
But what we do have as a general weakness in the economy is the institutional weakness. So if you have a change of management, say, at the URA, the person who started the IFRIS project, the intentions of the IFRIS project could have been lost. Let me give you an example. A typical trader in Chikubo doesn't use a computer. But IFRIS, you need a computer. So the person who came up with IFRIS was looking for efficiency gains. Let's admit that for big companies and medium-sized companies, IFRIS will give you a very fast way of reconciling your VAT and make it less difficult and less time wasting for the URA to balance when they come to audit you, because there's traceability. But where we get lost is when you go downtown. All cities in the world have downtown. And you try to put IFRIS downtown. What that does is that not only is the tax an issue, but the compliance aspect is required. And what those guys do, they don't want complicated things, they fold. The danger of that is that when they fold, then you bring in macroeconomics there. You see, the guy was buying breakfast every day. He was paying rent to a building which has probably been funded by a bank. So if you have enough of them closing, and then you add on the enforcement of KCCA, of chasing street vendors without, so those things add up over time, and then the impact comes like that. A fall in 100 businesses is going to impact rent, which will impact debt payment for the building owner, which will in fact impact the bank. In fact, private sector credit declined by about 8%, although the NPAs have reduced. So what that means is that the aggregate demand falls. Then when you go to the policy side, another example I can give you is, for example, now we have a major government project called the Parish Development Model, which is taking a lot of money, and the attempt is to redistribute or monetize the economy and get the people in the rural areas into the monetization aspect of the economy. But is that the only tool you can use? It means that there's a lot of administrative effort involved in URA collecting that money. Then you disperse it to so many parishes. But here's the challenge. Every time there's an intervention on the supply side of something, and there's no intervention on the demand side, there is a wastage of resources. I'll give you an example. There's a time Uganda wanted to boost maize production. So they pumped money into production of maize. And then the maize came out and there were no buyers. And the price of maize fell below the cost of production. So what happens when you do a PDM and you don't have a policy on transport? Let's say you could achieve that very same thing by reducing the tax, the direct tax you levy on a liter of diesel. It means that the people in rural areas are able to get their goods to market efficiently and in a cost-effective way, because the effective prices of goods that we buy in Kampala have a 40% transport component. Now, what happens with the stress you're talking about, Mr. Boji? If you are an individual, you haven't got any breaks. You've got 30% tax on your income. Then when you're buying, you pay 18% VAT. That comes to 58. You're paying tax on fuel. You're paying tax on your transactions. But you're the one who is supposed to buy the produce that is growing from the PDM intervention. So this is why we are still debating, are there more efficient ways of achieving the monetization? Why would you monetize the rural economy, but you don't incentivize transportation? I had a personal experience when I went to Rukunjiri in Bohoma. And having come from Buganda region, of course, I got the shock of the day because I couldn't find a single bush. There was so much produce, so much productivity. But even with the four-wheel drive car, it was hard to maneuver. So I kept asking myself, how do these goods get to the market? So the issue of policy, we would have expected to see such ideas where you connect the rural economy to the urban economy and you reduce the administrative aspects.
All right, Stephen?
Thank you. Yeah, let me throw in one or 2 points on the struggling businesses. I think there are lingering effects of COVID.
We still haven't gotten out of it.
I do not think so. When you sit in a public office, I think you see things differently. So the minister yesterday, with all confidence, said the economy has completely recovered. Where we sit in the private sector, we see it differently. Very few businesses have completely recovered from the COVID effects. Actually, many have not been able to put on their lights again. The 2 years of COVID disruption, and if you look at it from a credit perspective, if you had a loan running for 2 years, you're not doing business. Economy opens up and you start again. Despite what BOU did to sort of stagger and give some breaks in terms of reviewing maturities of these loans, you still have to pay that obligation. Now, by the time you catch up, other things have caught up with you, and then boom, businesses collapse. But that's one aspect. The other one is the tax regime. When you look at the tax numbers, how many people pay taxes? If you go to Kikubo, those guys are carrying a tax budget. So the tax disorganizes them because URA will focus on those few people that are supposed to pay tax, that are registered, and taxes will be a burden to them. Now, the issue, of course, going forward is how do we widen the tax base. That's another aspect. The last one is really the cost of credit. The cost of credit is very, very expensive in this country. You cannot borrow at 17, 19, 20% and expect to run a business successfully. So those are the issues that I have on the businesses. But let me just mention one point, going back to the exchange rate before it falls through the cracks. This has to do with our debt levels.
Okay.
We finance or pay debt in Forex. With the low reserves, heavy debt payments in Forex, we are going to have pressures. That's another risk that we face for the exchange rate going forward.
Okay.
Right.
I can see the call for austerity measures is one that comes out pretty much from very many sector players. Mr. Abeka spoke about the fact, explained how the ability to be able to give each executive director of an authority an SUV impacts on the petrodollar relationship. But what are the options that are available? And this one, let me go to my colleague in the business journalism world. What are the options available away from reducing the fleet of government cars? The permanent secretary has often spoken about the fact that if we reduce travel expenses, then we shall have a bit of money to put somewhere else. But when you compute the entire amount of money that is spent on the fleet of cars and then the travel expenses, it doesn't amount to a sum that can significantly impact if it were poured into another sector. Or maybe I could be getting this wrong, but are there any other options that we can go and, for example, chop significantly in terms of expenditure in that area so that we can be able to reallocate these funds somewhere else?
Okay, I think what is key is that even before the discussion on chopping starts, we need to ask ourselves, are these agencies doing what they are supposed to do?
Okay.
Are we seeing value for money? I remember there was a proposal some time back where I think someone was proposing that civil servants should be subjected to, value for money audits,
kind of
performance contracts and all that kind of thing. Because we need to look at that first and foremost. Because for me the principle would be where we put a shilling, what do we get out of that? And who is there to ensure that actually that comes out? In this whole discussion, yes, we're talking about the budget, 2024, 2025. But ideally, we're supposed to be looking at it in the context of the aspiration of Uganda, which are enshrined in Vision 2040. For starters, how are we aligned to that? So how we align to that now comes back to how now you put your ducks in line. The government agencies, who do you need, who don't you need to achieve that particular aspect. So in terms of the options available, away from that, I believe that as a country we need to, look more at production and productivity. Yeah. Yes, because I believe that particular area, we've talked so much about it, but we haven't been seen, to be boosting or bolstering, that particular
The interventions are not targeted
exactly
to do the kind of job that is required.
Exactly. So that is my thinking. So my belief, yes, we need, I know there's a discussion now on rationalization and all that. But you saw the other day, we're talking about rationalization, and then we saw, a raft of new civil servants proposed. So I think the key thing would be, what do these agencies do? And then that will determine whether you need it or you don't need it.
Rationalization is
just
one
in terms
that has
of options, just to add to Mr. Boji,
very quickly.
It's not all negative. So I just want to look at it like a company, look at the government like a company.
Okay.
Its products are the bridges, the roads, the airports, and then it has services that we all need, like security, education services, and health services. So what happens is there are opportunities that we have as a country that have been presented to us, and I can mention some of them. For example, all of a sudden, the Middle East realized that Ugandans are courteous and they can speak better English. So they started recruiting them, and that has taken up the remittances. So how do we invest to optimize that? How do we align our investment to optimize that? How do we reduce the friction of remittances.
That's right.
Friction by increasing more competition and reducing the cost. That's an opportunity. There is an opportunity of the East African community, which is always expanding. The opportunity is that now Somalia has joined. The entire GDP is 312.9. So what we put in the budget to take advantage of that opportunity, we want to expand exports. Do we have an Exim Bank? You know, government has opportunity that it has a lot of capital in financial institutions like Post Bank, and not just financial capital. There's a lot of human capital there. Like the CEOs of those banks, they are brilliant people. If you combine the 5 of them, from Housing Finance Bank to Uganda Development Bank, which is doing a good job, and they form an Exim Bank, you're going to pool capital that is going to help you to generate more dollars. That's an opportunity. However, those opportunities can turn into threats as well if we don't engage well on the diplomatic side. If you look at the East African community, it's a huge opportunity, and actually partly explains the growth in the economy to 6%. Because I do have the numbers, I just didn't want to bore you with all of them. But coming out of COVID, we've come out of 3%, 4%, and then reached 6%. And the main contributor is the regional trade, and where we have trade surpluses. But here's the challenge, or to agree with Mr. Kaboyo, the risk. Somalia, instability. South Sudan, instability. DRC of recent, which used to provide the huge market for exports, has also gone into war. So the risks are, if we don't engage maybe our foreign affairs ministry and equip them to diplomatically diffuse the conflicts, then the projections of the minister in the budget can be blown away.
All right. Gentlemen, I'm afraid time is not our very best ally. We're going to have to go for a break. When we return, this conversation will, of course, capture some of those aspects and a lot more that was presented to us as the minister delivered the 2024-2025 budget yesterday. Chris Higenyi, and we're coming to you live from the Victoria Hall here at the Kampala Serena Conference Center, where a post-budget analysis is due to begin in earnest. And of course, Absa Bank and Deloitte Uganda are the people that have put this together, and NTV will be broadcasting it live. All the digital platforms, for those that may not be here, you should be able to follow on X and the other platforms, including YouTube. Do stay with us. This is a special edition of Morning at NTV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're glad you're still with us here on a special edition of Morning at NTV, this 14th day of June 2024. We are talking the budget, of course, coming on the backdrop of the presentation of the financial year 2024-2025 budget by the Finance Minister yesterday. We are at the Victoria Hall of the Kampala Serena Conference Center, where our post-budget dialogue is due to take place, and Absa Bank and Deloitte Uganda are on top of things here, and as well as NTV that shall be bringing you that live across our platforms. Let me return to my panelists. I'm joined by Charles Boji, a business journalist and seasoned at that. I'm also joined by Stephen Kaboyo, who is Managing Director at Alpha Capital Partners, as well as Abubakar Mayanja, economist and Vice President Africa for Fin Advisors. Gentlemen, during the break, there was what was no doubt a concerning aspect on expenditure and what was a glaring miss on the part of the Finance Minister. And Mr. Charles Boji, you were particularly concerned at the fact that this shouldn't have been kept under the carpet as the Minister did. What was your where is the discomfort mainly when it comes to the Minister's inability to expound on the expenditure aspects in the budget?
Okay, Chris, actually, before I go there, one of the main issues is the debt issue.
The debt issue, yeah.
And I think this has received quite a lot of attention and lively debate, because if you notice, just looking at what the revenue board is supposed to collect, which comes to about 32 trillion Uganda shillings. Now, if you look at debt repayment, you know, in this budget, it's the single biggest expenditure item.
That's
and
right.
It's taking almost everything that URA is going to be collecting. And I think what is even more concerning is the fact that it's not a fixed number. Because despite the fact that it's where it is, we are borrowing more. And I think just last week we got some new injection of loan from Korea of almost $500 million. So I think given the circumstances that have been well elaborated and articulated by Mr. Mayanja here and Stephen, you can see that we're going to have a challenge. It's going to put a strain in our ability as a country to provide for other important aspects like social services, health, education, and all the others. But then also of more significant importance is that if what you collect is all going to service debt, then that means you're left with other non-tax options. And how many or how big are these non-tax options, revenue collection options for Uganda? How big are they? So you ask yourself that question. Of course, we also live at a time when, for lack of a better word, there seems to be a bit of donor fatigue. Donors are not forthcoming as they used to. And also the global economy, it's not just a problem in Uganda or East Africa. The global economy doesn't seem to be in a good place. So all those, if you sum them up, they paint a picture that may not really be palatable.
That's right.
But I'll put it to Stephen here and Mr. Mayanja, but starting with Stephen. I don't know, on the debt issue, what are options? If you to advise, the finance minister and the person who's making the decisions, how do you advise them, on how to go about debt vis-a-vis other responsibilities?
Charles, I think you bring up a very interesting angle. Debt. It's true, we are in trouble in terms of debt. When you look at the numbers, a year ago when we were sitting here, we are talking about 49% debt to GDP ratio. In my own calculation, today we are at 54% debt to GDP ratio. That means, looking at the most popular ratio, we have breached that threshold. What does it mean? It means that we have graduated from moderate risk to very high risk. But at the same time, we're continuing to borrow. We have a larger budget than what we had last year. So what does that mean? It means that actually we are in a debt trap of sorts. Getting out of this cycle is going to be tricky if we don't take a holistic approach and come up with measures to manage the debt that we have now. And I think, for me, I can even be radical and suggest that we need a conversation with our creditors. Start early, because we need to avoid going into default. Our peers have, and there are lessons to learn. So I think the key point is, can we stop, pause, and look at what are the options of managing this debt going forward? It's not going to be easy. When you look at the approved financing sources, the budget as proposed yesterday, external, commercial borrowing is going to be hard because of our credit rating. We have a negative outlook, which is B- with a negative outlook. That does not sound very good for attractive interest rates for sovereign borrowing. So that's a major red flag right there. Concessional funding has shrunk all over the world. The other major issue that keeps emerging is this LGBTQ law. It has hurt us. You believe it or not, it has had an impact on government financing, especially to do with donor flows. And I don't see that also disappearing soon. When you come to domestic, and I think that's where the heavy burden is going to fall, it has implications. The implications are that you crowd out the private sector, you starve them of credit, and then it will have implications: inflation, interest rates, and growth. So even the outlook of the projected growth may be challenged or undermined because of this. So it can undermine the whole macroeconomic stability going forward. So we need to be careful. But let me quickly, because I know the time is not on our side, one issue that, Chris, you raised is staying away from disclosing austerity measures or how we manage our expenditure going forward. I think there are not very many options. It's unfortunate that our policymakers are taking it as business as usual, which is very dangerous. For me, again, I can come out radically, and if I was in a policy making seat, I would say, let's go to round 2 for structural adjustment. Cut down. It's not about land cruisers alone. You have to look at the whole expenditure framework and be able to take measures that can take us out of this problem. Okay.
Mr. Boji, just to go very quickly, there are 2 points that I agree with that Mr. Kaboya I said, because I want to hit them quite quick because of time. It is true that we don't have to wait to have conversations about restructuring. We wouldn't be the first and we wouldn't be the last. So we don't need to wait until distress. Now, I want to give a very bad example, but it can happen. Ghana was where we were a few years ago. They were very confident. They had gold, they had oil. Then they also did what we are going to do with Umeme, and energy is very important for the economy, but maybe I'll come back to that point. There are 2 elements that make debt servicing difficult. We have a big trade deficit in Uganda. It goes to about 4 billion USD. Yes. So the central bank, I must say, the last year, they've done fantastic gymnastics to balance things. I can give you some numbers on that. Exchange rate has depreciated by 3% in that environment. That means that they've really done a good job. But what has been supporting us is that on the capital account, there have been investments in oil coming. Because paying back foreign debt is not just a question of affordability. You must have the dollars to do so. So now, going forward, to come directly to your question, is 1, we must do restructuring, or we should start the conversation. Now, is it feasible? Because government is proposing to borrow 9.1 trillion from the domestic market, but the banking sector is worth 50 trillion in assets. So arithmetically, it's possible. But then we have a debt rollover of 19.8. So also arithmetically speaking, that would mean that the government would have borrowed from the banking system close to 51% or 55% thereabouts. So what that means is we need to diversify the sources of debt. How? We are members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation now. The Arab countries, they do not invest in bonds that are interest-bearing, but they can invest in bonds that are revenue generating. So if we do sukuk bonds, that's what they are called, you will diversify the pool of investors that we have available to us along with the nature of the instruments. And if you direct that debt into projects that directly attack the trade balance. So let's say if you build a refinery, then you're going to stop importing fuels, which is the highest import. So you have to combine innovation in terms of the instruments and diversification of foreign markets, and then you combine it with what you do with the money. If you get that money and you don't put it in something that is either going to directly reduce the imports or increase the exports. The last one is when countries get distressed, or companies, they sell off assets. So if you look at the net effect of the investment in Uganda Airlines on the treasury, for example, yeah, this is taken a lot of money, but now you have that asset. When you're stressed, instead of going to borrow more, you can divest some of those shares. Kenya has done that before. They sold out of Safaricom. These are the practical steps. You look at the government portfolio. For example, they've done a very good job with the Uganda Development Corporation. It has some mature investments that you can divest out of and put money in the treasury. You don't have to own 100% of everything. I think that's my contribution.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I think at that point in time, because of what we are facing and trying to ensure that we begin the post-budget dialogue, the numbers here at the Victoria Hall, if I'm to take a 360-degree spin, it's a good attendance, and of course we do look forward to hearing from the experts who will be helping us dissect and break down pretty much some of the aspects that we might have not covered right here on the special edition of Morning at NTV. Charles?
And on that note, Chris, we have, like you rightly mentioned at the beginning, we have a panel of experts that are going to be weighing in here. But at the same time, we expect the PSST, Minister of Finance, who is also going to give us really some good context of where we're standing at the moment. So we're going to hand over to Dr. Muhumuza, who is going to be, the host and moderator for the panel discussion.
That's right.
And we have quite some interesting panelists that are going to be sharing with us, some really, really good ideas around the budget and how to move forward.
Okay.
So at this moment, viewers, we thank you, and we're going to go straight to the panel discussion. But actually, before the panel discussion, we're going to have some remarks from the PSST, and then at some point we'll hear from the audience. We want to make this as interactive as possible. Thank you. So we'll pass it on to Dr. Fred Muhumuza.